All right, today we will finish our World War II notes, and we're going to get to the end of the war and some major impacts the war had on the world to come. All right, so we're going to start with Roosevelt's death, April 12th, 1945. FDR dies, and Truman becomes president. And I think one of the best transitions, best unplanned transitions in world history was Truman taking over for FDR. FDR is, without a doubt, one of the greatest presidents in American history. Um, Truman does a masterful job in a really tight spot, uh, kind of pushing FDR's aims at the end of the war. And FDR, he knew that this was a possibility. He had Henry Wallace as his vice president in his earlier years. He went with Truman later on, knowing he was probably a better and more able administrator and less liberal or radical than Wallace was. So it was a good choice on FDR's part. A parallel to this that was a bad choice would be going back to Lincoln in 1864, choosing Johnson, a Southerner, to be, and from the opposite party, to be his running mate in 1864 was definitely Lincoln's biggest mistake. The end of the war in Germany comes pretty fast and furious. The Allies are charging across Germany from the east and the west. Patton crosses the Rhine. He's the major general for the Americans, along with Montgomery and Eisenhower. In the west, the Russians are charging through territory in the eastern Germany. The Russians actually get to Berlin first. Hitler commits suicide April 30th, 1945 in his bunker. And May 8th, 1945, Germany surrenders. It's known as VE Day throughout the world as Victory in Europe. And from this point onward, we'd be focusing on the Pacific. And one thing that shows how massive this war is, America had 16 million servicemen and women overseas, many in Europe, many in the Pacific. Okay. All right, so the war in the Pacific. Starting in 1943, the U.S. employed something known as island hopping. This was a strategy of taking only strategically held Japanese islands. If you remember the map of the Japanese Empire, it was a plethora of islands from Australia to Japan to China. Taking all of those would have maybe taken a decade. So American military experts decided that they would just capture strategically held islands, and the war in the Pacific became very brutal. A turning point for the U.S. Was taking, first of all, Midway, which is a new movie that's out, really good movie. It turned the tide of the war, Midway did. The turning point that signaled the end for the Japanese would be the Battle of Leyte Gulf in the Philippines and the retaking of the Philippine stronghold. But the two most brutal battles that brought us the closest to Japan and allowed us to bomb Tokyo and all of Japan daily were Iwo Jima and Okinawa. These are massive battles. This is the Iwo Jima World War II Memorial, which for the longest time was the only World War II memorial in the capital. It's the men raising the flag on the island. And this is fighting on Okinawa. You can see how desolate and terrible it was. If you've seen the movie with Private Doss, the medic who refuses to pick up a weapon, that is on Okinawa. Okay, but both of those were brutal battles, and it goes to the Japanese would not surrender. Famous pilots for the Japanese Air Force, known as kamikazes, the world's first suicide bombers, and it goes back to Japanese samurai code, where samurais won't surrender. In fact, dying in battle is preferable to being captured, and you saw a lot of that in World War II with the Japanese. All right, and this is that the island hopping battles. Okinawa is the closest one to Japan. Iwo Jima is also close enough to bomb. America still has a giant base on Okinawa. In fact, I know people from Thief River who've served in Okinawa today. The atomic era begins. Many sides were attempting to build atomic bombs. And the U.S. project was known as the Manhattan Project. And it is the biggest project in American history. It spanned the entire nation. They had plants building uranium and plutonium, other things needed for the bomb. And the biggest facility was actually in Ohio to build uranium and split atoms. But the biggest facility as far as putting the bomb together were in New Mexico. And on August 6th and 9th, the U.S. dropped the first and only atomic bombs ever dropped on people. The Enola Gay dropped Little Boy on Hiroshima. 100,000 died instantly there. On August 9th, Fat Man, the second bomb, was dropped on Nagasaki, and 60,000 died instantly there. Shortly after, Japan surrenders, and this is Victory in Japan Day, and the U.S. has won the war. The Allies have won the war. One thing I want to dive deeply into, these are the only bombs ever dropped on people, okay? So I want to go into reasons for and reasons against dropping these bombs. In my regular ed history class, kind of the culmination of the year is to write an essay on why we should have dropped the bombs, why we shouldn't have dropped the bombs, and what do you think we should have done? If you'll notice, that's the question of the day for the end of the World War II unit is why we should or should not have dropped the atomic bombs. All right, so let's get into the reasons why we should have. One, it would have saved American lives. Japanese would not surrender. The statistics aren't clear, but it's roughly, they say they would have saved 100,000 American lives. The invasion of Japan would have been brutal, and it probably saved even Japanese lives because they were so fierce of fighters, would not surrender, that maybe more of them would have died in an invasion. Second one, it would end the war quickly and decisively. Third one, it showed communists that we had the power to use the bomb and put us ahead in the Cold War about to begin. There's a lot of evidence that the U.S. did choose to drop the bombs to put us ahead in that Cold War that was about to start with the Soviets. All right, so why should we not have dropped the bombs? Again, these are the only bombs ever dropped on people. Okay? We were going to win the war without it. After Leyte Gulf, after Okinawa and Iwo Jima, the war was over. It was just a matter of forcing the Japanese to surrender. Dropping it on innocent civilians was immoral. Nagasaki was very much a civilian city. Hiroshima was a pretty military city. It'd be kind of like, Minot has a giant air base. If someone dropped a bomb there, there's military involvement. Whereas Minneapolis, very little military. That's kind of a comparison. And last one, unsure of the consequences of the bomb. Radiation, total damage. Thousands of Japanese would die later because of the radiation and things like that. So, again, there's your reasons for and against. You make your decision. Okay. All right, and then the last slide, I just have the image of the atomic age beginning and the Cold War that would start between the U.S. and the Soviets. This up here is Fat Man, this is Little Boy, and there is the image of the explosion. I'm not sure if that's Hiroshima or Nagasaki. And that ends our notes for World War II.